Spider-Man is a character who has been very lucky in the world of video games, with more than 25 games across multiple consoles, such as the Atari 2600, Game Boy, Genesis, and all generations of PlayStation. Given this enormity of video games, it is valid and interesting to ask, what are the best stories and narratives that these character games have tried to tell? In the following video, we will take a tour of what we believe are the 10 best stories in Spider-Man video games. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. Released in 2002 and developed by Treyarch, this video game essentially told us the events of the first Spider-Man movie made by Sam Raimi. However, many additions were made to expand the story and make a more complete video game. Here we can mention the addition of villains such as Shocker, the Vulture, the Scorpion, Kraven, among others stands out. Although the additional elements makes for a more complete and fun experience in the sense of having more things to do, the addition of these elements does not contribute to the central story elements of the film. Perhaps the Scorpion subplot gives some substance to Norman's motivations for falling into despair, which eventually transforms him into the Green Goblin. But it's also not a change in development that makes that much of a difference. To avoid being so negative, it can be highlighted that the central elements of the film are present and are told in an adequate way, although it would not have hurt to see a little more of Peter and Mary Jane, to feel more of the final battle and the story in general. Obviously released in the year 2000 and developed by Neversoft, Spider-Man is a video game that takes elements from the 90s television series, but is not canon within the series. The story focuses on Carnage and Dr. Octopus, who begin what could be interpreted as a symbiote invasion. Spider-Man logically must stop them, however before this, he must face several classic enemies, such as the Scorpion, Venom, Rhino, Mysterio, among many others. In positive terms, the game stands out for its exciting narrative that captures the essence of the Spider-Man universe, showing us various situations that are very reminiscent of both classic comics and the stories seen in the 90s series. On a more negative note, it can be mentioned that it lacks complexity and emotional depth. The plot can feel a bit shallow compared to some of the more complex and mature stories that have appeared in Spider-Man comics. In short, Neversoft's Spider-Man creates an interesting and fun story to experience, but it doesn't go much further. Developed by Beenox and published by Activision, the game was launched in 2010 for several consoles, including the Xbox 360, PS3, PC, among others. The story itself is quite simple. Mysterio tries to steal the Tablet of Order and Chaos in a confrontation with Spidey. The latter ends up destroying it and dividing it into various pieces that will end up wandering through the multiverse. Therefore, it is the duty of the four Spideys, the Classic, the Ultimate, the Noir, and the 2099, to recover the pieces of the tablet from the various enemies found in each universe. The story does not particularly stand out in this title. It has no depth, and is only an excuse for us to enjoy the exquisite gameplay of each of the dimensions. However, in this same line, what can be highlighted with great grandeur is the enormous work that it has done, both gameplay-wise and story-wise, by highlighting the differences between dimensions and versions of Spider-Man. For example, Spider-Man Noir lives in a dark and gloomy version of New York in the 1930s, while Spider-Man 2099 lives in a technological and futuristic future. These differences in the proposals are reflected in the characters and the gameplay of each dimension. The variety in environments and characters helps keep the game experience fresh and fun, although a deeper and more captivating story would have been nice. Another game developed by Beenox and published by Activision, but this time in 2012 for multiple consoles such as the PS3, PS Vita, PC, among others. The story of this game, in a sense, can serve as an epilogue to the film of the same name, with Peter Parker trying to deal with the consequences of the genetic experiments carried out by Oscorp and the release of mutant creatures known as cross-species. In this context, Spidey must face both mutant versions of classic characters, such as Vermin, Scorpion, Rhino, the Iguana, among others, as well as robotic spider killers that Alistair Smythe is spreading throughout New York to save the city from these creatures. A really interesting aspect that gives meaning and purpose to the game's story is that, in a sense, it explores topics such as scientific ethics and corporate power, In addition to offering a more expanded look at the relationship between Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy, offering emotional moments that add depth to Spider-Man's character. The scale of the game is gigantic. The entire city is on the verge of collapse due to this infection. And the game, through the good execution of the story, transmits those feelings of danger and chaos to the player in a good way. In simple terms, the game offers us a story that feels transcendent and relevant, but that also gives us more of the character of Spider-Man in the emotional and affective sphere. A highly recommended game. Developed by VideoGames and released in 2008, Spider-Man Web of Shadows presented a darker story. Compared to other Spider-Man games, the story takes us to the return of Venom, who, after a confrontation with Spider-Man, has learned to reproduce the symbiote, an ability that will eventually lead him to carry out a large-scale invasion of New York City, infecting heroes and villains by equal. Spidey must face this invasion with the help of multiple allies, such as S.H.I.E.L.D., Black Cat, Moon Knight, among others. But Spidey must also face himself, since the presence of the symbiote inside him will lead him to have moments of internal conflict where he must decide whether to act as a hero or as a villain. The premise of the story is extremely interesting, as it presents us with a Spider-Man who must use darkness to fight darkness, trying not to fall prey to it. The concept of the story is powerful, however, the execution of it is a bit clumsy. The supporting characters lack depth, and their motivations often seem forced or unconvincing. The lack of character development leaves the player without any emotional connection to the story, which is evidenced by the poor choice system. The decisions themselves are not the problem. Each one of them leaves us with a different result that makes the experience worth repeating, however, except for a couple of choices that are indeed relevant and radically change the result of the story. The vast majority are no more than anecdotes, even falling into irrelevance. The game has 4 endings, however, how we get to them does not vary too much. The only thing that matters is the accumulation of negative decisions and the final choice of Black Cat. Despite everything negative that can be mentioned, the scale of the game is immense, and the excellent gameplay, the level design, and the visual excellence of the symbiotic New York make us as a player enter into the experience and get involved in what is happening, despite lacking depth. Ultimate Spider-Man is a video game developed by Treyarch and published by Activision in 2005, based on the comic book series of the same name created by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley. The story follows Peter Parker as he faces the challenges of being a teenage superhero, delving into his relationship with Eddie Brock and how they both deal with their powers and the secrets surrounding the death of their parents. The game offers an immersive narrative that captures the essence of the original comic, while maintaining the authenticity and depth of the characters. The dynamic between Peter and Eddie adds an emotional layer, highlighting the internal struggle of both characters, which is perfectly reflected through the gameplay by allowing us to use both characters. Although the story is constantly interrupted by side missions such as races or robberies to access the main missions, which can interrupt the pace and make it a bit tiring, the overall execution is very good. A highly recommended game that, despite its age, still feels very fresh. The latest Spider-Man game developed by Insomniac Games for PlayStation 5. The story focuses on the return of Harry Osborn to Peter's life, who brings with him a new alien guest that will complicate things in the long term. In this same context, we find Peter and Miles trying to deal with their private lives and the role of being the Spider-Men of New York. There are many positive things that can be mentioned about the story of this game, particularly the villains, such as Kraven, who is a character with some layers of depth that allow us to understand his need to find a worthy rival. Or also Harry Osborn's Venom, who has a deeper story and motivations than simply tormenting Peter, as in other versions. We also can't forget the story of Peter and the symbiote. Although it is a version that falls short in terms of showing us the consequences in Peter Parker's environment regarding his negative attitude when using the symbiote, we also get into Peter's feelings, seeing what he truly feels and how the symbiote takes advantage of these feelings to bring out the worst in him. Miles Morales, on the other hand, is a character who unfortunately falls a little behind in this game. There are interesting elements such as his life in Brooklyn Visions and his relationship with Martin Lee regarding the events of the first game, but we don't really see a progression in the character that is too noticeable. especially considering that there are some elements that even contradict ideas that were presented in his individual game. Yes, the Miles original was not the best idea Insomniac could have created. In short, Marvel's Spider-Man 2 has a good story in general terms, with a decent execution, but a bit rushed, especially in its third act. There is some good development of Peter as a character, but unfortunately that development resulted in the other main characters being sidelined. The exciting spin-off of the acclaimed game from Insomniac Games was released in 2020. The story logically focuses on Miles Morales, who has his first completely solo adventure without Peter's mentoring. The main plot of the game revolves around the Roxxon Corporation, which is carrying out suspicious activities in New York, including the construction of a new energy source called Newform. As Miles investigates further, he discovers that Roxxon is involved in dangerous experiments, and that they are willing to do anything to protect their secrets. In this same context, Miles finds himself facing a new villain, known as the Tinkerer, who leads a technologically advanced criminal organization that opposes Roxxon. As the story progresses, Miles is forced to make difficult decisions and confront his own moral dilemmas as he fights to stop the growing threat looming over the city. The game also places significant importance on the bonds of friendship and family, which is evidenced in his relationship with Rio Morales, which adds an additional layer of emotional complexity to the story, especially when Miles is forced to hide his identity as Spider-Man to protect her. In short, the story of this game touches on very strong and interesting themes, such as family and the sense of belonging, ideas that are executed perfectly, which emotionally involves the player.
Eddie Brock, listen to me!
The pseudo-sequel to Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, developed by Beenox, presents us with a more intriguing and complex story than its predecessor. The premise of the story shows us a conflict between Anti-Venom and Spider-Man that ends with the apparent death of our hero in the arms of Miguel O'Hara, the Spider-Man of the year 2099. As the story unfolds, Miguel O'Hara discovers that the timeline has been altered by the scientist Walker Sloan, who has traveled back in time to establish the corporation Alchemax earlier than intended. Using a device called the Chronolink, Miguel connects with Peter Parker in the present, warning him of the impending danger. Together, the two Spider-Men navigate their respective eras, facing interconnected challenges and enemies. The story in the first act is simply perfect, as it allows us to see the interactions and personality contrasts between Peter and Miguel in their ways of being Spider-Man, all immersed in moments of maximum tension before the apparent death of Peter. However, at the point where the two Spider-Men are in opposite timelines, the story tends to stagnate. Yes, it is recognized that there are excellent moments, such as the rescue of Mary Jane, the revelation of who the CEO of Alchemax is, among other truly shocking moments, and excellently acted by Christopher Daniel Barnes and Josh Keaton. However, the central panorama is quite boring, and the truth is that the repetitive gameplay doesn't help much. In summary, the story of Edge of Time is generally very good, reaching perfection in its first act. However, in the following hours the story declines. It is still very good, but not to the levels that had been reached before. The first Spider-Man game developed by Insomniac Games was special, not only because of the immense hype it generated before its release, but also because it was an experience that made us feel like Spider-Man like we had never felt in a video game. More than just an action adventure, this game offers us an emotionally rich narrative, exploring the complexities of the life of Peter Parker and his spider alter ego in a way that captivates players from the first moment. The plot of this game is a perfect adaptation of everything that Spider-Man means, the heroism and altruism that characterizes him, as well as the constant sacrifices that he must make to honor the promise he made to Uncle Ben. Marvel's Spider-Man is a brave game that is not afraid to place a mission as inconsequential as Spider-Man trying to search for his things thrown in the trash, all with the goal that we truly feel the element of decision that Spider-Man must make all the days to continue with his mission. Another of the highlights of Marvel's Spider-Man is its vibrant and well-developed supporting cast, such as Mary Jane Watson, Miles Morales, and Aunt May. Each character is skillfully written and portrayed, adding layers of depth to the story and bringing Spider-Man's world to life in a way that is truly captivating. We cannot forget the villains, particularly Martin Lee and Otto Octavius, who have strong and relevant motivations for doing what they do. Motivations that make us as a player feel the characters and get involved with what happens to them. Simply put, Marvel's Spider-Man is a masterpiece of the superhero genre, with a narrative and gameplay that delights and thrills every person who experiences it. Well, dear friends, that's all for today's video. Wishing you a very happy afternoon. We ask you to tell us in the comments which is your favorite video game of this excellent character. With nothing more to say, goodbye,